Welcome to the Sherman Report. Here's Peter Sherman.
Well, hi there. Welcome to the Sherman Report for Thursday, September 26, 2024. Quite a busy and somewhat compelling program today. We have two guests on the show today. Igal Hecht is a filmmaker who has done documentary work screened around the world for the last 25 years or so. His most recent film is something called The Killing Roads. It documents the dreadful events of October 7th, 2023 in Israel as terrorists murdered over 1,200 innocents for no other reason than where they lived and what religion they practiced. Later, our regular Lisa McLeod, MPP, at least she's an MPP now. She won't be after the next election because she is ending that 19-year swath of her career. We'll be talking to her about the Bloc Quebecois holding the Trudeau government to ransom by insisting that two laws be passed before October 29th, lest its support be withdrawn from motions of non-confidence. Well, I suppose that's one way to pass laws, not the one I would prefer, but that's what they're doing. Also, Lisa's thinking on Liberal MPs making a motion to the Foreign Affairs Committee asking that a Palestinian state be negotiated without Israeli participation. How does that even work? Also, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, has announced a feasibility study is going to be underway into digging a tunnel under 55 kilometers of Highway 401, North America's busiest stretch of highway. Hint, people don't seem to be liking it, as I spoke to them earlier in the day. All coming right up on the Sherman Report.
You're with the Sherman Report, daily news commentary available at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, with video posted on YouTube and Facebook. Here's Peter Sherman.
All right, Igal Hecht created Chutzpah Productions about 25 years ago, and he's had some award-winning films that have been described as controversial and thought-provoking, dealing largely with human rights issues. Let me welcome you to the show, Igal. Igal Hecht, say hi.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Hi, audience. Pleasure to have you here. You, Igal, have been involved in the production of over 65 documentary films and over 20 television series, and you've been screened nationally and internationally. You've been on Netflix and BBC and Documentary Channel and CBC and Yes TV and HBO Europe and Vice TV and many others. So this is not your first rodeo. Igal Hecht is with us today to tell us a little about The Killing Roads, which explores the harrowing experiences of victims, survivors, and first responders during the brutal terrorist attacks orchestrated by Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists on October 7th, 2023. So this is not a pretty subject. And we do have some footage to show. I'm not going to do that yet. Tell us what possessed you to make a film that really is quite chilling.
I basically wanted to make this film because I noticed the overwhelming sense of denial that exists in Canada and internationally as well. But since I live here, the fact that people believe that something happened on October 7th, or some people believe that it was warranted. You know, I just had a conversation with somebody who told me it was a warranted act of resistance against occupiers. Making it seem as if it was against an army, which some of it was, but the majority, the reality is that on October 7th, 6,000 Palestinian terrorists, be it Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and even Gazan citizens, woke up with one intention in mind, and that is to murder, kill, burn, and rape Israelis, specifically Israeli Jews. And that is the reality that exists around October 7th, a reality that's been glossed over because of what's happening in Gaza. But nothing would have happened in Gaza. Now, one thing, there would be no war. Nobody would have died in Gaza if on that day, Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists didn't wake up to murder and kill Jews. And that is an essential point. And that is completely glossed over, especially in the Canadian media. So,
there's plenty of nasty footage around.
Right.
I myself have looked at some of the stuff that came off the GoPro head-worn cameras that the terrorists themselves used to proudly, I use the word, I can't believe it, proudly
Very much so.
record these deeds that they did that are unspeakable. What happened to that stuff, and what happened that made you capable of gathering, I guess, some of that and get your own footage? I mean, you weren't there at the time. You didn't
No,
drive down the road and film what you filmed,
no,
but here you
no. I
have
was
it.
in
Where did it
Canada.
come from?
So basically, a lot of it came from 3 months of research of sitting on Telegram and going through pretty much every Palestinian, Hamas, even ISIS sites, looking for this footage. And it's all there. Also, Israeli sources. I was also given footage from the victims we interviewed. They filmed some of them, some of the footage themselves. We have a woman by the name of Daniela Gandhi, who was basically trapped in her car for 7 hours. And she filmed everything from her point of view. And when you watch the film, it's almost you're there in her place, experiencing what she experienced. And I got really lucky as we were filming. We were giving some footage from an organization called United Hatzalah, which is basically an emergency ambulance organization. And they did amazing work that day. They saved hundreds of people's lives. And they gave me 2 folders. One folder had some B-roll for television that other sources have used. And then there was another folder, 50 hours worth. And what it was basically dash cams from the ambulances who were there on that road from 6:30 a.m. till about 10 p.m. that day. And so we have every single millimeter of that road covered, Road 34 and Road 232. And with that footage, with having that dash cam footage, what you see is the sheer horror, the burn cars, the dead bodies, the terrorist firings, and all of that is also visual proof that showcases what they did on that day. So I combined all of those sources together. So yes, in the film, there's about 50%, I think, footage of things that if you've looked for it, you've seen it, but also footage that you've never seen before. And it's horrible. It's horrific footage.
Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit more about it, but first of all, I want to play a 2.5-minute trailer
Sure.
of this film so that we can context what you're talking about, and I will issue a warning. This is not pretty. So if you're squeamish, this is where you stop watching. Here we go.
כל היישובים בלגן, מלא מחבלים, חדירות של מחבלים. אני פותח דלת של האמבולנס, בודק דופק, הרוג, עולה לאמבולנס, ממשיך הלאה. אני אומר, אני רוצה אנשים חיים לפנות היום.
אמרתי לו גם, הם לא באים להציל אותנו, הם באים להרוג אותנו. אתה מבין שאתה הולך למות? כאוס.
השאיר אותנו שבורים.
הוא אמר לי, בואי לקחת אותי. וניסיתי.
Hundreds of cars, 350 cars were burned.
And then 1,000 bullets started to go off. And then they threw a Molotov cocktail.
כולם מתחילים לרוץ לכיוון השטח. זה פשוט ירי שלא מפסיק. ממש טובחים באנשים.
They didn't have any way to defend themselves. And there wasn't help coming.
זה לגמרי כביש הדמים.
ואז אני קולטת את החוליית מחבלים, והם בעצם מתחילים לרסס אותי כבר מכל כיוון.
אותו הידרדר ונעצר פה, ליד המיגונית. פה עשו עליהם את הווידוי הריגה.
כשהוא אמר לי, אמא, אני לא מרגיש את הרגליים, מבחינתי הוא מת. זהו. וזה השבת השחורה.
That's pretty chilling. And I have no doubt that if that's the 2.5 minutes you're using as a trailer, which is something that's meant to attract people's interest, it will do that. But I also imagine that the remaining portion of the entire film is a heck of a lot more graphic than that.
It is. It really is. It's a heartbreaking film. It's a heartbreaking film to watch. It's definitely a heartbreaking film to make. Absolutely.
You're posting the entire film on the web for all to see, no charge.
No
Why?
charge. So initially, I watched a film called Scream Before Silence that came out about 6 or 7 months ago, and they did the same thing. And I wondered why they did that, and then I read the article, and the reason is to really show what happened, show the truth, show the undeniable facts visually of what happened to a wide audience, as wide an audience as possible. The widest streamer, the widest broadcaster out there right now is YouTube, is X, Twitter, social media, a website. The problem with having it on television is that eventually someone who doesn't have that channel won't be able to watch it. This way, we ensure that pretty much anyone who has access to a browser can watch this film.
This isn't viewing material that everyone should see. Certainly not children ever until they're adults.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not even some adults. Isn't that true?
That is true. And, the litmus test, I think, would be if you can handle the trailer, maybe you can handle the film. And I want to make sure that people understand this is not, we don't use the footage in a perverse way or in any way. We basically, whatever we use is used to illustrate, to prove what's being said by our victims, by our EMTs. The problem is there's so much denial about October 7th and what the Palestinian terrorists did that we have to showcase this footage. And it's one thing to have testimonials. It's another thing where you can visually prove and illustrate what was done.
Well, I'll say one thing, and I think I'm Jewish, and you're Jewish, and I'm certainly proud of my heritage. I know what happened. You know what happened, and I think everybody knows what happened. But there's so much denial in the world that it makes my heart hurt to think of how many people hate us just for being Jews or Israelis for coming from Israel,
right.
And think that this started because Israelis wanted to go and shoot up terrorists. Didn't happen that way.
It definitely didn't happen that way. And unfortunately, here in Toronto, you see that every day. That mindset is allowed to walk freely on the street and preach for a genocide of Jews and, set up encampments, something that would never happen to any other group. Imagine if the KKK, wearing a different hood, it's not a keffiyeh, showed up in UFT and set up an encampment and basically said minorities can't walk here because I don't believe with their political ideology or some nonsense like that. Nobody would stand for that. But here in Toronto, we have a mayor that stood for it. We have a media that was excusing it. And we have a whole infrastructure of unions and educators and universities that were okay with it. It's unbelievable. And this, by the way, had nothing to do with Israel, right? If you want to demonstrate against Israel and its political decisions or whatnot, there's a consulate. Go there, go demonstrate. But here in Canada, we have Jews who are being attacked simply because they're Jews. You don't know what their political affiliation is, and yet you attack their synagogues, you attack their businesses, etc. It's insane. It's insane because it's allowed to happen. October 7th emboldened all the anti-Semites and all of these basic, what I argue are neo-Nazis in a, repackaged form to come out and basically attack Jews. And it was the most horrible day since the Holocaust. They killed 1,200 people in less than 6 hours. It wasn't a full day. They killed 1,200 people. They raped, they burned, they murdered 1,200 people in less than 6 hours. Auschwitz wasn't so efficient, on a daily basis. And people don't realize that. And it's infuriating. So when you ask me why I made this film, this is one of the reasons why I made this film and why I'm offering it for free. Because, making money is important, but what I can do and what I have the skill set to do is make films. I've made them for 25 years. And making a film like this, it's the most personal films. I had family there. I had family who were fighting in Sderot. I had family in Ashkelon who were being bombarded, and had these terrorists, these Palestinian terrorists, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others, not being stopped at the junction of Yad Mordechai, They would have gone to Ashkelon and murdered more people. They would have gone to Rehovot and Rishon and Ashdod. These are heavily populated cities. They didn't just kill people on the roads. They didn't just kill people in the kibbutzim and at the Nova Party. They also killed people in cities. Cities like Sderot had 80 people died. 80 people were murdered there. Cities like Ofakim and Netivot, and people don't realize the breadth of murder, the fact that they just woke up that day with hopes of killing Jews. And that is the central story here that is completely being glossed over in Canada and in many other places as well, unfortunately.
All right, just one last question. Where and when can people view The Killing Roads?
So people can view The Killing Roads on the killingroads.com, www.thekillingroads.com, starting on October 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then it'll just live there. And if for whatever reason it's still on thekillingroads.com, if somebody tries to take the website down, it'll also be available on social media, on X, on The Killing Roads, on YouTube, on The Killing Roads, and on Vimeo as well. And so hopefully people can watch it, and I hope people also share it. I know it's a weird film to ask you to share, but I hope people share the links, and I hope people share the film with as many people as possible. And I also encourage any organization, any school, any campus group, get in touch with me through the website. I will give you the film for free. I just want people to watch what really happened on October 7th and watch the barbarity of these terrorists.
Igal Hecht, thank you very much for your time today. And what you've done in our language is a mitzvah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
You're with the Sherman Report, daily news commentary, live at 5 p.m. Video version live at X, YouTube, and Facebook. Here's Peter Sherman.
Lisa McLeod is a friend of mine, and that's the qualification for her being on this program. But if you're a regular, you heard her on the Sherman Report last week. She's signed on as a regular, I'm happy to say, and what makes her special and qualified is she's been a member of provincial parliament in Ontario for 19 years, long time. She's not even 50, and she represents Nepean, which, if you don't know, is a middle suburb of Ottawa. She's held 2 cabinet portfolios. They were Minister of Children, Community and Social Services, and later on, Minister of Heritage, Sports, Tourism and Culture Industries. And I worked with Lisa when we were in opposition. Great times, and welcome again, Lisa McLeod.
Well, thanks for having me. My coffee cup looks pretty huge on the screen, so I'm going to move it.
Well, keep drinking that stuff. It'll keep you awake.
Yeah, well, hopefully.
Okay. Let's dig right in, because there's no dearth of news today, Lisa. There's a group of unnamed Liberal MPs. I'm sure the lovely and talented Melanie Joly is in there, our Foreign Affairs Minister, if you can call her that. Anyway, they moved that the House of Commons Committee on Foreign Relations study negotiating the creation of a Palestinian state without any involvement from Israel. Are these people stupid or what?
Well, I mean, stupid and or what? Like, or what are they? Because, first of all, House of Commons committee struck by anonymous people is as good as the paper it's written on. Second, they have no standing at the United Nations. They have no standing in the World Court. They're effectively a group of people making a study. And you and I have both been involved in politics long enough to know when somebody is involved in a study, it rarely goes anywhere. It's like a blue ribbon panel. It is like an advisory committee. It has no weight. It has no teeth. It is not binding. So they can do it. And then I think the exclusionary purpose of, keeping Israel off of the agenda and off the table is just, I think, a communications exercise for a number of Liberal MPs who think that there's a certain segment of their community willing to vote that certain way. And so that's the big challenge. Is it's a communications tool. It sets expectations up one way or the other. and will ultimately fail. And again, you mentioned Melanie Joly. I think she's the worst foreign minister this country has ever seen. She can't take a stand without changing it 5 minutes later. She is an appeaser and of the worst kind. And I think that is going to reflect very poorly of us in Canada.
I think so too. And I want to take this a step further. I mean, I asked, are they stupid? Not because I'm trying to show disrespect to parliamentarians. I understand that they're trying to achieve something in their own way, but it's the group's way of coming up with what is in effect a two-state solution without having two states. In fact, there's not even one state, because you have to ask the question, who would even represent this amorphous entity called Palestine? You're going to sit down and you're going to negotiate with who or what? Hezbollah and Hamas? I don't think so, because those aren't people, those are terrorists.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just hit the nail on the head, and I put out a tweet about this yesterday, but it really is, about dealing with terrorism and how you deal with terrorism. The last time I checked, both Hamas and Hezbollah were listed as terrorist organizations in Canada. It would be, I think, it will be a slight against our national well-being, but also against our national or international reputation if we were to engage with terrorists. And I think that should be a major consideration about the strength of our own democracy when we're engaging with terrorists. The second thing is, again, I just go back to the fact that this is a nothing burger, because it's not going to achieve or do anything other than appease terrorists and alienate the Jewish community in the province of Ontario and, of course, the larger country of Canada. I think that it really is a moot point that they want to do this. Good for them if they think it's going to help them electorally. But I think by and large, you and I are smart enough to read the tea leaves, and this government is going to be thrown out of office hard, and it'll be for a very long time. And it won't just be about how they treated the Middle East. It will be about how they treated everyday Canadians.
Let me just swivel around and maintain the focus on government by asking about the Bloc Quebecois. The Bloc Quebecois, late yesterday, Yves-François Blanchet got up to a podium and a microphone and said, there are these two bills. And he elaborated on what they are. At this point in this discussion, it doesn't even matter. He basically said that he was willing to support the government of Trudeau, provided these two bills were passed and no later than October 29th. And if they weren't passed by October 29th, he'd withdraw his support and vote with Pierre Poilievre on confidence motions. In other words, looking to bring the government down. And then that would leave our poor old friend Jagmeet Singh out in the cold, being the lone guy who's either going to support or not support Trudeau, which he once was, but then he ripped up that paper. What do you think of the Bloc Quebecois? First of all, I might say a Quebec party that has no interest and no sway in the rest of Canada, lining up against Trudeau that way. And I'm not looking for you to defend Trudeau either. I know you won't. But technically, these guys are setting themselves up to become large enough, based on the votes they can get and the seats they can procure in the province of Quebec, to actually become His Majesty's loyal opposition of Canada. How does that even work?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is not the truth. Here is, and it's not the first time. And I think the bigger issue here is history is now repeating itself. And a lot of these things happened in the and toward the end of the Mulroney mandate. And it should be said, and I think people will resonate with this, is the only time we've had national identity crises where we have had referendums and where we've had people actually want to leave their country is during Liberal mandates. So I want to be very clear about that, because as much as they go into Quebec and they think that they speak for Quebecers, it's when they are on their way out that they have a big challenge. And we saw that with the Chrétien and the referendums back then. The second thing is, and I'll say this, Yves Blanchet had the ability yesterday to pull the trigger and cause an election, chose not to, kicking the can down the road and trying to make do with the fact that he told Quebecers that he he was on their side before and they didn't want an election. Figured out, I'm pretty sure, that they did want an election. They do want to get rid of Mr. Trudeau, and now he's stuck figuring out half measures. The final thing I'll say.
I was just going to say something changed yesterday, though, Lisa. When he did that, forget about what he did and Quebec for a moment. I think what he did is he put us closer to an election than we were when the day started.
Well, I think, yeah, because I think he got a tremendous backlash from the people of Quebec, who he says he is going to support. I think that they do want an election. They proved that when they elected his own member of parliament in the by-election a couple of weeks ago. So I think that, he was speaking out of both sides of his mouth. He wasn't being loyal, not to Canada. Definitely we're not going to get that out of the Bloc. He wasn't being loyal to the people he says he was supporting. And I think that's a challenge. But I think that there's one other piece to this. It's not just the national unity piece. It's not just the election piece. It's the third piece there is you've got, and I'll say this as somebody who has bipolar disorder, we have a political party that is schizophrenic. They don't have a clear ideological base. They have decided they choose issues based on the issue, and there's nothing solid that keeps them defending a certain set of principles. And that's why they can almost get away with some of this stuff, though I don't think they will.
Interesting. Let's take a look at an interesting situation that's come up with Canada Post. I don't know if many people who are watching us know this, but the CEO of Canada Post told their annual meeting a couple of weeks ago that Canada Post is unsustainable. The package industry, he says, is the primary killer that has wrecked Canada Post. I think in the last quarter, I don't have the figures in front of me, they lost about $270 million. So you can't keep a company going like that. What can they do with Canada Post at this point? It once was a crown corporation. It's sort of attached to the government, but I don't think it is a crown corporation anymore. I don't know what its status is. I do know this, that if you lose $1 billion a year, which is what you're talking about, you can't stay in business.
Yeah, but I mean, in the era of Amazon, Temu, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, the reality is the marketplaces had to figure out how to adapt to this new type of service delivery. And so Air Canada is going to have to do, Canada Post is going to have to do the exact same thing, as is Air Canada, and as is so many other government-owned or operated entities. And so when you look at, for example, FedEx, which is aligned, I think, with Canada Post still, they have to make a decision. And I live in the suburbs, as you mentioned, of Ottawa. And, if I'm working from home, I see all day delivery trucks coming in to my neighbors or to my house, and they're dropping something off that we've ordered from Amazon. And so looking at what the private model is going to be absolutely critical. However, there is an importance of Air Canada, of why do I keep saying Air Canada? Of Canada Post. I don't know.
They're doing okay.
Yeah, they are. Of Canada Post, because they are responsible for mail delivery, and there are a number of Canadians still today who rely on sending a letter or sending a bill and getting it through. So I think that they have to figure out how to maintain the service delivery, particularly in rural and remote Canada, while at the same time looking at, in urban and suburban areas, the ability for them to deliver their product, or to figure out who's better to deliver their product for the bottom line. So I think it's an important conversation. It's good that the CEO brought it up, and it's one that we have to take our passion out, because it becomes almost like the CBC. When we get stuck to an entity that served a purpose at a certain period of time, sometimes it's hard for us to let it go. And we have to really... Yeah, and we really have to not make these decisions emotionally or based on our attachments in the past, when the world literally has changed in the last 10 years to a different type of model and a different type of service expectations, by the way. Like, I remember, and you probably do too, when the LCBO was going to deliver, and it would take like a week. And then you're going on to Uber, and Uber's going to deliver it in an hour. And then the government agency can't figure out how to keep it up, and then it becomes obsolete almost. And so in a competitive environment, you have to figure out how to be competitive. So at least they're having the conversation, the CEO is being honest about it. And as Canadians, we're going to have to guide them to what's acceptable and I know what's acceptable to you and me in the more urban setting of this country. It's not acceptable to somebody that's living in rural Nova Scotia or in remote northern communities.
I agree. I mean, I go down and check my mail every single day, and I might get 2 pieces of advertising and 1 letter from the CRA during an entire week. And the CRA doesn't really need to use mail if it didn't want to. Anyway, we'll leave that one alone and watch what happens. I have a feeling that topic may come up again. One last one before I let you go. Housing, as you know, in Ontario, the rest of Canada too, is dead, effing dead. You've sat around the cabinet table and undoubtedly had discussions about this. I'm not so much interested in those, but I'm interested in this. Will a real reduction in rates revive housing? Because we expect 0.5% drop in the overnight rate from the Bank of Canada come October. So in 3 weeks or so, that would take us to 3.75%. And another 0.5% in December, that'll bring us to 3.25%. And some are saying, and I think it makes sense since we're at the goal that they set of 2% inflation. Some say 2.5% by the middle of 2025. When do you see the fuse getting lit and the firecracker exploding, as in housing starts, purchases, sales, bidding wars, and the whole 9 yards?
I don't know. I think it's going to be a while. Like I go to the grocery store and the grocery shopper and the family, and when I see butter less than $8.99, I feel like I should Facebook that thing, send it out on Messenger, let people know on X that you can find butter for less than $8.99.
I paid that yesterday. Thank you.
Yeah, but you know something, it speaks to the broader affordability issue. And, you know, inflation is still inflation, whether it goes down or up, it's still inflation. I think that you're still looking at higher prices that the market hasn't adjusted to, or people haven't adjusted to. And finally, salaries aren't going up. So I think that the broader affordability question is probably the better question. I think people want a home. I think that there are people like that have saved and they're dreaming for a home, but it's still, I think, out of reach. And I look at, for example, my own daughter. It's hard to find more than 1 shift a week for her as she goes through university. We're lucky we saved, but not every family has the opportunity to. It's not due to their own negligence, is they needed that $100 a week for something else, and they know that's catching up. So there's becoming an unequal opportunity there for certain kids, and then I just look at the fact that everyday staples have gone up, and it's becoming less easy to put that money aside for a car or a rainy day or whatever. So I remain pessimistic about that, and the builder that I know that built this community. You know, the houses after COVID and that big bump, they started to drop the prices, you know, in some cases by $100K because people just weren't buying. I'm not sure just dropping the prices is going to allow people to catch up, though I certainly do hope so. I think we
haven't seen prices go down much in Toronto, no. But we have seen sales drop dramatically.
Yeah, and governments continue to increase taxes and fees, that sort of thing. I just don't see until people are making a lot more money and everything balances out that any quick fix is going to turn it around.
Lisa McLeod, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You do the same. Bye-bye.
You're with the Sherman Report. Daily news commentary available at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, with video posted on YouTube and Facebook. Here's Peter Sherman.
Well, once upon a time, there was a premier named Mike Harris in Ontario. I was, and I am, a conservative, and I've met Mike Harris. Old-timers spoke of him with reverence. I met him a few times, but I never came away with quite that feeling. Mike was premier, and his government was, as governments always are, cash-strapped. He leased the 407 highway, as many of you know, to a Spanish-led consortium for $3.1 billion. They paid $3.1 billion one time, and they got it for 99 years. Not a bad deal for them. They got it for 99 years. Can you imagine? It is said to be worth over $30 billion today. So 10 times what they got for it. And 30 years has elapsed. So I guess if we hang around for 69 more years, we get to drive on it for free. I don't know. Once upon a time in 2018, there was another idea on alleviating horrific traffic on 401, advanced by the Toronto Region Board of Trade. I quote from On-Site magazine, a vertical expansion of Highway 401. Listen to that again, a vertical expansion of Highway 401 near Toronto Pearson International Airport could relieve congestion on this critical stretch of road, according to the Toronto Region Board of Trade. The board's latest report puts forward recommendations to address the highway's bottleneck. They had a bottleneck a few years ago. It's a bigger bottleneck now, or a smaller one, depending on how you look at it. Anyway, it is said that at the time it was costing households along that corridor an additional $125 annually, just the time spent being stuck in traffic. So one of three recommendations, the proposed Super Express. The Super Express expansion included a combination of double-decked construction, truck priority, and autonomous vehicle readiness. The board did not present a figure for the expansion, but estimates the total cost could range from $4 to $10 billion based on similar projects in Texas. I think we've all seen pictures, if not having visited places where they have double-decker highways. We had none, as far as I know, anywhere in Canada. Anyway, yesterday it was Premier Doug Ford's turn. He wants to dig underneath the 401 and build what would be the world's largest tunnel to effectively double 401 capacity. Cost? Who the hell even knows? Here's Premier Ford.
That's why today I'm announcing that our government is exploring the feasibility of a tunnel under the Highway 401. This tunnel would serve as a new expressway for both cars in transit, from Brampton and Mississauga in the west to Markham and Scarborough in the east, connecting with major roads and highways along the way. This tunnel and expressway will cut gridlock, support economic growth, and help get people moving faster.
Well, never criticize anyone who seeks to improve a lousy situation. I think anything to assist in traveling along the 401 would be phenomenal. But I think of that project and I wish Doug Ford every success, but boy, compared to European expressways, though, it's so god-awful. In countries that I've visited, indeed, the countries that I've driven in, trucks have to stay in the far right-hand lane. Cars have to remain in the center, and cars may only leave the center to pass in the left-hand lane, the passing lane. Like we have a passing lane on the 401 that people think, well, it's 110 kilometers per hour is the speed limit, so I can sit in that left-hand lane at 110 as long as I want. It's pretty amazing. So, wow, does that ever work? Maybe before we bring in the tunneling machines, because they may still be stuck handling the crosstown light rail, we ought to look at cost because it's going to be astronomical. I heard people talking about $500 million per kilometer. Do the math. I think it comes to something like $30 billion. And, you know, it took Boston, I think, took twice the time that it had originally estimated to go underground. And that turned out to be the best part of 20 years. So it's one thing to talk about it, another thing to get it going. So all of that said, Premier Ford should not be dismissed for advancing ideas. In 20 years, the Greater Toronto, Hamilton, Barrie, Cobourg area, and that's what it's going to be called. It's my name. I'm going to say it again. Greater Toronto, Hamilton, Barrie, Cobourg area will be home to what, 15 million, 20 million people? The 401, as it exists, the way it is now, would be ridiculous. Perhaps we could begin by, even in the next year sometime, forcing all trucks, the big 18-wheelers, onto the 407 and negotiating with the operators of 407 over there in Spain to permit that for a flat fee paid annually by the province. It's an idea. There are many. Thanks for being with us. I'll see you tomorrow right here on the Sherman Report.
The Sherman Report, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the video version at YouTube, Facebook, and always at petersherman.com. Thanks for listening to the Sherman Report. If you'd like to connect with Peter directly, just go to petersherman.com.